I always trusted Sarah, my wife. We'd been together for 8 years through thick and thin, and I genuinely thought we were happy. She was beautiful, kind, and ambitious, the sort of woman who could light up a room. That's why when she got her big promotion at work, I was nothing but supportive. She deserved it, and I wanted her to soar. But then came him Matthew Grant, her new boss. From the story Sarah told me, he was arrogant, commanding, and always trying to prove he was the alpha in any room. His reputation preceded him. He was known for being ruthless, both in business and in how he treated people. At first, I didn't think much of it. A man like that would hardly notice someone like me, a humble IT manager at a mid-sized company. He was all about power, and I wasn't in his orbit. That all changed the night of Sarah's office Christmas party. I'd never met Matthew before, but I'd heard plenty. Sarah had described him as intense and exacting, but she brushed it off as part of his professional persona. Still, something about the way she talked about him, the way her eyes darted nervously when his name came up, put me on edge. I decided to go to the party, even though she'd suggested I didn't need to. The venue was extravagant. A swanky downtown hotel with chandeliers that looked like they cost more than my car. As soon as we walked in, I felt like I didn't belong. Sarah, though, was in her element. She wore a stunning red dress, and heads turned when we entered. I was proud to be her husband, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Then I met Matthew. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and impeccably dressed in a tailored suit. His handshake was firm, almost crushing, as if he were testing me. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, so you're the famous husband," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "Sarah's told me so much about you." "All good, I hope?" I replied, forcing a smile. "Of course," he said, though the smirk on his face suggested otherwise. He turned to Sarah, placing a hand on her shoulder in a way that felt too familiar. "You've got quite a woman here, one of the best on my team." The way he looked at her made my stomach churn. It wasn't admiration. It was possession. The rest of the evening was a blur of small talk and forced smiles. But I couldn't ignore the way Matthew hovered around Sarah, touching her arm, leaning in close when he spoke. She seemed uncomfortable but didn't pull away. Maybe she was just trying to keep the peace, I thought. But the seed of doubt had been planted. It wasn't until weeks later that my suspicions were confirmed. Sarah had been working late more often than usual, always with some excuse about an urgent project or a last-minute deadline. One night, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she showered. A message popped up on the screen. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last night was incredible." Matthew. My heart stopped. I didn't want to believe it. I'd always trusted her, but there it was, undeniable. The woman I loved was having an affair with her boss. For days, I wrestled with what to do. Confront her, leave. But as the initial shock wore off, my anger grew. This wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about him, the smug self-proclaimed alpha who thought he could take whatever he wanted, including my wife. I decided I wouldn't just confront them. I'd make him pay. I started by doing some digging. Being an IT manager had its perks. I knew how to find things people wanted to keep hidden. It didn't take long to uncover the skeletons in Matthew's closet. He had a history of shady business dealings, questionable expense reports, and a reputation for skirting HR policies. He was untouchable because he delivered results, but his arrogance made him careless. The first step in my plan was to let Sarah know I knew. I waited until she got home late one night, her hair disheveled and guilt written all over her face. "How was work?" I asked, my voice calm but cold. "Fine," she said, avoiding my eyes. "Anything you want to tell me?" She froze, her hand hovering over her purse. "What do you mean?" I pulled out her phone, the incriminating message still displayed on the screen. Her face went pale. "I trusted you, Sarah. I loved you. And this is what you do." She started to cry, mumbling apologies and excuses. I didn't care. I told her I needed space and that she should stay with a friend for a while. She didn't argue. With Sarah out of the house, I focused on Matthew. If he wanted to play power games, he'd picked the wrong opponent. I anonymously leaked the evidence of his expense report fraud to his company's board of directors. It was easy enough to do, A few well-placed emails with screenshots and detailed explanations were all it took. Within days, an internal investigation was launched. But I wasn't done. Next, I gathered evidence of his inappropriate behavior with female employees. It turned out Sarah wasn't the first. I reached out to a few of his former subordinates through LinkedIn, presenting myself as a concerned citizen looking into workplace harassment. 2 women were willing to share their stories, and I helped them file formal complaints with HR. Matthew's world was starting to crumble, but I wanted to deliver the final blow in person. I arranged a meeting with him under the guise of a potential business opportunity. Using a fake name and email, I posed as a small business owner interested in his company's services. He agreed to meet at a high-end restaurant, no doubt expecting to intimidate me with his presence. When I walked in, his confident smile faltered. "You," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Me," I replied, taking a seat across from him. "We need to talk." "I don't know what you think you're doing," he started, but I cut him off. "What I'm doing," I said, leaning in, "is taking back control. You thought you could humiliate me, take what's mine, and get away with it. But you underestimated me." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were copies of the evidence I'd collected, the fraudulent expenses, the harassment claims, even emails he'd sent to Sarah that violated company policy. His face turned ashen as he flipped through the pages. "Where did you get this?" he demanded. "Doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is what happens next. You're done, Matthew. The board's already investigating you. HR is reviewing the complaints. By this time next week, your career will be in ruins." He stared at me, his jaw clenched, trying to maintain his composure. "What do you want?" "I don't want anything from you," I said. "This isn't about blackmail. This is about justice. You think you're untouchable, but you're not. People like you always think you're the alpha until someone stronger comes along. Consider this your reckoning." I stood up, leaving the folder on the table. "Enjoy the rest of your evening, Matthew. It might be one of your last as a free man." As I walked out of the restaurant, I felt a sense of closure. Sarah and I would never be the same, but I'd made my point. Matthew Grant wasn't invincible, and he'd learned that the hard way. 2 weeks later, he was fired, publicly disgraced, and facing legal action. Sarah tried to reconcile, but I couldn't look at her the same way. I filed for divorce knowing I deserved better. Revenge didn't heal the hurt, but it gave me a sense of control. And sometimes that's enough.